So these numbers, these ISO numbers, are they're similar to the aperture and the shutter, and that each number kind of represents a stop in photography. And I say kind of because they're not stops, okay, but they do they can act as stops in photography, and each one is either doubling, right, or having, or doubling or having the film sensitivity to light, right? And the numbers reflect that, right? 2 times 25 is 50. 2 times 50 is 100. 2 times 100 is 200. So we're doubling the numbers, and they call this, and so you can use these numbers as extra stops in photography when you run out of stops for your Sunny 16 rule, such as in the candlelight, a candlelight exposure, the Sunny 16 rule, right? Remember, we start off at f16 and 1/250th of a second, and the ISO is at 200, right? 200 ISO. So when you start off there and say you need the extra, because you need 10.5 stops more light, sometimes you can't get that with just your aperture and your shutter, and then you need to push your film. They call it pushing your film. So you can add extra stops, right, for that kind of candlelight by changing your ISO, right? You could get 1, 2, 3 extra stops, or even 4 extra stops out of that. And that's called pushing your film. When you use your ISO to add extra stops to your exposure, okay, it's called pushing your film. So pushing your film is pushing it that way, okay, to a film that is much more sensitive to light. If you go this way, it's called pulling. So let me do this. That would be if your exposure is too bright and you're like, I need something a little extra. I need to pull my film to get the exposure looking right, and my aperture and shutter aren't enough at that moment. Then you can pull your film for brighter conditions and push your film for darker conditions. Okay, so that would be darker, and this would be lighter. Right, remember, fast, slow. So this is the aperture, and like I said, these numbers represent your films or your sensors, right? Sensitivity to light, right? Very sensitive, not as sensitive. That's it. Now, there is something you need to know about this, anything that's over, say, 400, so 800 to 3200 film. It can get an effect that we call film grain. Let me write this down here. And it's an actual look that you can see in film, in fast film, right? So that would be something that you would get from fast film, right? That's these numbers over here, right? These ISO numbers, okay? So film grain makes your photo look a little grainy, right? We see in digital, we see pixelation, but in photography, in film photography, when you're using your ISO, you'll notice that the image will seem a little grainy. Now, that's an actual effect that you can put on your photograph. Some people really like it, but it will get that kind of grainy look in the image itself. Some people like that effect, and it's kind of fun. If you're doing, say, commercial photography, you probably don't want that because you want to see everything. So that's one of the effects you can get from using your ISO at these higher numbers, right? Where it's more sensitive to light, right? Fast film, more sensitive. So this is the more sensitive over here. Okay, so that's it about ISO, right? International Standards Organization describes your film or sensor's sensitivity to light. And that's all it is. And it's one of the 3 controls on your camera that control exposure. Remember, aperture, shutter, ISO. There's only 3. You guys ought to be able to remember that, okay? 3 controls: aperture, shutter, ISO. Right. We'll see you next lecture.